The Roman legions fight face to face, but sometimes they let the earth itself do the wounding. Before a single sword was drawn, the ground could already be turned into a weapon. Hidden beneath the soil or scattered in open fields, these traps slowed, maimed, and broke enemy morale long before direct combat began. One of the simplest yet most effective tools was a sharp obstacle known as the stimulus. Crafted from iron or sharpened wood, it was embedded just above the surface, often near fortresses, narrow passes, or expected enemy paths. The points were deadly enough to pierce sandals, feet, or hooves, turning movement into agony. A single step could disable a soldier for the rest of the battle, but the real power of the stimulus wasn't the physical wound. It was the hesitation, the constant doubt with each footfall. Alongside the stimulus came the tribulus, a compact but vicious device designed to cripple horses. Also called caltrops, these spiked iron stars were tossed in clusters across plains and roads. No matter how they landed, at least one point always faced upward. When cavalry or chariots advanced, the results were catastrophic. Hooves met steel, chaos followed. In battles where speed and momentum were key, the tribulus shattered both. Together, these traps reshaped the battlefield. The Romans didn't need to face every threat head-on. Sometimes they simply let their enemies walk into pain. To the untrained eye, the land ahead looked ordinary. Grass, soil, maybe a few bushes. But for those marching toward Roman defenses, the next step could be their last. One of the most devious tactics employed by Roman engineers was the lilia. Conical pits arranged in tight formations, each one filled with a sharpened stake at its base. Hidden under twigs or leaves, they were virtually invisible. The name came from their shape, like the petals of a lily, beautiful in form, deadly in purpose. Soldiers advancing in tight formations would suddenly vanish, swallowed by the ground itself. Those who survived the fall often emerged wounded, panicked, or both. Just behind them, another obstacle waited, the tipi. These were rows of deep, narrow ditches lined with sharpened branches, often arranged in a zigzag pattern to prevent easy crossing. Unlike the lilia, these traps didn't hide. They intimidated. Enemies were forced to slow down, break formation, and expose themselves to missiles from Roman defenders. Movement became chaos. Order collapsed. But not all traps were sharp. Some were designed to exhaust. The loricata fossa, or armored ditch, was a trench lined with wooden stakes angled outward, forcing soldiers to raise their shields while crossing. The weight of armor, the incline of the slope, and the threat of hidden weapons made every advance a brutal effort. By the time they reached the other side, if they did, they were no longer fighting at full strength. Further still, in certain fortified zones, the Romans employed interlocking pits. Multiple rows of shallow traps that looked harmless from a distance, but disrupted enemy rhythm completely. No cavalry charge could gain traction, no infantry line could stay straight. These layered defenses weren't designed to kill outright, they were made to break the flow of war. For the Romans, the battlefield began long before the first clash of blades. Victory was often buried beneath the dirt. The Romans understood that not every battle had to be fought with swords or spears. Sometimes slowing the enemy was enough. Sometimes making them doubt their footing was all it took. At the front of many Roman siege lines stood a barrier that seemed simple, a ditch filled with water. But this was no ordinary trench. Dug wide and deep, it was positioned to block siege engines, ladders, and cavalry alike. Muddy banks trapped wheels. The waterline masked depth and footing. In one motion, entire formations could slip, drown, or stall in confusion. Without momentum, even the strongest army became vulnerable. Then came the camouflaged trenches, shallow pits concealed under moss, earth, or branches. Deployed in open fields, these traps were meant not just to harm, but to deceive. Enemies charging with confidence would suddenly collapse into the ground, weapons and shields scattered. The chaos created by just a few hidden ditches could spread backward through entire ranks, shattering the cohesion Roman enemies relied on. What looked like flat terrain became a landscape of uncertainty. In colder campaigns, Roman engineers went further, digging ice pits filled with frigid water or frozen spikes. Used in northern regions, these traps added a new layer of brutality: frostbite, hypothermia, and death from exposure. Marching became a gamble where nature itself fought on Rome's side. And finally, in some rare but documented cases, booby-trapped culverts, narrow drainage tunnels beneath roads or fortifications, were rigged to collapse. If an enemy attempted to sneak through or drain out the water, the structure gave way, burying intruders alive or cutting off entire escape routes. The genius of these traps lay not in how many they killed, but in how many they slowed, confused, or broke before the real fighting even began. The Roman army didn't just block the path, it poisoned the very idea of moving forward. When the Romans laid siege, they didn't surround a city with soldiers, they surrounded it with fear. Long before ladders were raised or gates battered, Roman engineers crafted invisible cages, layers of traps designed to make escape as deadly as resistance. One of the most effective tools in this arsenal was the service, a hidden mechanism woven from tensioned branches or wooden arms. Buried just below the surface, it activated the moment an enemy stepped into the trigger zone. With a snap, the trap would seize ankles, drag down limbs, or entangle weapons. It didn't kill, it captured, and for a soldier stuck in enemy territory, being held in place was often worse than death. But the strength of Rome's defense wasn't in one trap, it was in how they combined. At Alesia, Julius Caesar ordered the construction of dual fortification lines, one facing inward to contain the Gauls and one outward to repel reinforcements. Between those lines, the ground was layered with everything from stimuli to lilia, sippi, and ditches, arranged not randomly, but systematically. Each trap fed into the next, wearing down morale and draining strength step by step. In the forests of Germania and the hills of Britannia, similar techniques were deployed. Forts were encircled not just with walls, but with terrain engineered to trap, confuse, and delay. The enemy could see the fort, but every path to it came at a cost. Every step forward risked entanglement, injury, or worse. Even temporary camps, set up by legionaries at day's end, followed strict layouts that allowed for quick deployment of traps overnight. A surprise night attack, anticipated, and often punished by a sudden fall into a trench or the sharp bite of an unseen stake. By the time enemy forces reached the walls, if they did, they were no longer an army. They were a scattered, demoralized shadow of what they had been. Rome didn't win by chance, it won by preparation, and sometimes the deadliest weapons never left the ground.